Welcome to the ICC Pulse Podcast, the show where we get to come alongside you and members across the country to equip and encourage. I'm Beau Hansen, your host for Season 6, and just to tell you a little bit more about my background, part of being an entrepreneur for most of my career often meant one person wearing a lot of hats. I've done a lot of freelance marketing over the years, and in that, I got to dip my toe into the world of artificial intelligence. Today's episode on AI was an absolute blast to record. So much of what I have seen or experienced with AI, man, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So no doubt, this conversation can become overwhelming very quickly. So I want to invite you to hang with me because ICC has done an incredible job placing this on a shelf that's easy to not only reach, but use when you need it. As usual, we have a couple of guests here who are going to be extremely helpful in our understanding of this topic and also be available for you and I as we implement AI in our local context. Hey Siri, play today's episode. It's my pleasure to get this unbelievable episode kicked off alongside Joan O'Neill. Joan is the Chief Knowledge Officer for the Code Council. And so Joan, you've been in this role as Chief Knowledge Officer since 2020? Is that right?
Correct. I was hired actually right before the pandemic went into full gear in February of 2020. I joined the Code Council as Chief Knowledge Officer.
Okay. So tell us what you've been focused on since being in this role.
Sure. So I was hired as part of our digital transformation strategy in the 2025 strategic plan for the International Code Council. One of the core pillars was digitization and embracing digitization to deliver for our clients, for our members in terms of 24/7 access of our content and of our services. And it's been a terrific journey. But again, what we're really trying to do and what I'm leading is full transparency of why we want to embrace digital. There's a reason for it. We're not doing it for the sake of doing it. We're really doing it to drive efficiency and a growth for our clients, our jurisdictions, and making content and services more accessible. And that's what digital does. It really allows real-time updates. It allows information to be more highly consumable. It's more accurate, in my opinion. Again, if you think about a book, and we love books, so many of our members and clients still prefer a book, and we'll continue to deliver that. But if you think about a book, once it's printed, you can't update it. So the beauty of digital is you can constantly update it, and you can add new tools and features to enhance that content. So that's what I've been leading as part of the Code Council. One of our premier platforms is Digital Codes. Digital Codes Premium is our paid subscription offering, and that has over 2,100 titles now, many features, including our ICC AI Navigator that was launched in the last year.
Yeah, which we get to explore further in this episode. And I just want to pause and express my personal gratitude. There are so many benefits to having those digital codes on your phone, on your tablet, when you're out in the field. I can't tell you how many times I pull up the app and quickly have an answer in 2 seconds. So thank you for doing that. That's been an incredible blessing for us.
Now, it's great to hear. As I like to say, our building officials, our plan review professionals, they're on the move 24/7. And especially when COVID hit, let's face it, everybody was working remote. And that's where digital really started to take off and people started to embrace it. So we did get a boost there, even though it was a difficult time to get through. It did ignite interest and acceptance in digital tools and solutions.
All right. So nerd alert, admittedly, probably my favorite code book is the existing building code because it has so much flexibility between what can be viewed as some of our more rigid industry standards and preserving the character and oftentimes quirkiness of an older building. Those worlds are not always compatible, and the existing building code helps marry them in a pretty wonderfully prescriptive way. So the traditional method is classifying the scope of work accurately so that the building safety regulations are enforced appropriately, right? That takes a thorough plan review from the building codes department. That's one pretty specific example, but do you see AI being able to step further into situations like that to help make the process easier?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I think often people are challenged with in that situation is how fast can you turn around a plan review, right?
Yeah.
And the accuracy, the timeliness, and really where AI can offer a benefit is in that speed. Think of it as the foundation. you can ask AI tools a question and really have a place to start in a much faster turnaround time.
Right.
Doesn't mean that it takes the human element out of it. And in fact, I think that's one element of AI. It's a tool. It's an additional tool. Just like when Google came on in 1998, I always like to say that's the students after 1998 were digital natives because Google was in their ecosystem from learning and finding information. AI is going to play the same kind of role. It's going to speed up information gathering, and that's going to allow plan reviews to, again, turn around those plan reviews and inspections and permits and so forth at a faster pace. It still will require due diligence and technical reviews, again, from those professionals that are certified to do that, but it will provide a foundation for gathering that information.
That's a good way to put it, viewing it as a foundation of the process, because you're right. The first question we should ask as plan reviewers is which code book do we start with? And so in the situation I gave earlier, especially with an existing building code dealing with unique situations, maybe it's a historic building or so many things to make sure that we're thinking through before we chase rabbits too far. AI will help us start in the right place. I'm thankful you brought that up. That's a good point. But could you go further there? What other key AI technologies are relevant to building safety? Do you see anything coming down the pipe?
I am seeing one in particular, a company I'd like to mention is a company called Archistar, and they're developing a new e-check platform. And the platform is really intended to provide jurisdictions an ability to, again, use AI as a way to speed up and accelerate that plan review process through this e-check platform to do code compliance checking. And so it's early days. In fact, we'll be announcing a pilot with them in the coming weeks where we will be working with 5 to 10 jurisdictions who've expressed interest in doing this and who are, well on their way of embracing digital. And so that's a great example. I think code checking is, if I had to say the thing that people ask me the most about, that is it.
Would you say that is the singular technology that's poised to revolutionize our industry?
I don't think I could say it's the singular because there are so many. The one thing I like to remind people around AI is we're in early days.
Yeah.
Even though we've talked about machine learning, AI, augmented reality, virtual reality, these things have been around for 10, 20 years, really. But similar to what happened with ebooks, it wasn't really until Kindle came along where ebooks was revolutionized and it became a format that consumers embraced. And I see the same thing with ChatGPT. So ChatGPT really just came onto the market in February of 23 is when they announced it. But now we've got Google, we have Amazon, we've got pretty much every major tech player now with a AI tool. And then you have all the startups in information technology and education field. So, the reason I mention Archistar, one is that we feel that this is something we've been looking for. We've been looking for this e-check kind of code compliance platform. And we believe that from the technology we've seen so far, it looks very promising. But again, one of the things when I came on board the ICC that I brought into the organization is you just never dive 100% in before you have data and R&D and analysis. And that's very important. So that's why we're approaching this as a pilot. We're creating a proof of concept. We're piloting with 5 to 10 cities. Let's see how it proves out. So I do like to say that there's not one emerging technology right now in AI. I think there will be leaders and we'll know more a lot in the next 6 to 12 months.
That's exciting. I'm excited.
It is exciting. It is exciting. The other thing I'd like to mention is not be afraid.
Yeah.
And again, I was brought in to lead our digital transformation strategy. And so clearly I have a bit of a bias. I will say that. But I also have seen the results and I can see how embracing digital really does improve the experience in terms of just how you acquire information, how you learn, and so forth. And so for AI, we embrace this early on. We are one of the leading SDOs, the standard developing organizations that have embraced AI and actually have a tool in the marketplace. And so that just shows our commitment to innovation. AI is going to play a critical role, similar to what BIM has done for the architecture, engineering, construction industry. Most architects and design firms are using things like Revit design tools, AutoCAD. And so the AEC market has really embraced BIM. And now that's a critical tool for any of those professionals. AI is going to play the same role.
I wonder if there's any integration opportunities. One of the things we are looking at as a municipality, or not looking at, slowly integrating, is the FUSA system, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we have a real-time crime center now where our our police department can monitor with the private sector's willingness to be a part of this system, where all these camera systems on these buildings can be linked in the event of any crime taking place. It's an immediate response from our police department. It's an incredible thing. There's some scary things to it, but there's also some very valuable things to it when you're talking about crime prevention. What I'm getting at is I'm wondering if, with electrical systems and things of that nature, the integration opportunities with AI, as those two worlds continue to improve, there's got to be some really fascinating conversations taking place out there. Have you heard any of those?
The areas where I'm reading more about it is around energy efficiency, compliance and regulation, fire detection. Various AI tools are going to be critical. Copilot, is a tool that Microsoft has had in the market now for some time. So for any organization that is a Microsoft shop, so to speak, they're going to be able to utilize Copilot, just like we are. We're embracing that right now as well. And so I think that's where a number of people are going to start. They're going to start with major platforms that they're already investing in, and they're going to leverage those AI tools, in their various departments.
Well, and also, to be fair, we're talking about AI as if it just started. This is something that has been going on for some time. I mean, you've been working with essentially this technology and the early stages of it for a while now. So what are some examples that are everyday AI that we might not even realize?
To me, the one I like to ask about every day is right now, the majority of people, if you look both professionals, is they're very comfortable in their Elasticsearch using Google, right? Or a similar type platform. And they're used to asking it a question a certain way. When you move to an AI environment, and I don't know how much time you've spent or any of our listeners have spent in ChatGPT, but I would encourage everyone listening to this to spend time every day. Spend time in ChatGPT or whatever bot you use asking it questions, because it requires you to ask the question different than if you're just doing a major search. When you're just doing a minor or major search, you often just put in the information. I'm looking for a local restaurant, or I'm looking for a way to something about plan review or issuing a permit. When you use ChatGPT, it's a smart tool, and that means you have to be more thoughtful in how you ask the question. And so to me, that's the everyday use that some people may be using, most people probably are not, or they're not using it the right way. And so to me, it's all about education around AI. That's what we're trying to do as part of our AI Navigator tool, is train this tool by getting our users to be more effective in how they're asking questions, because then we're going to get better answers as it learns and it improves down the road. But to me, that's the everyday use that some people may be aware of or may not be aware of. And that's where the success stories are going to come. Again, I don't know in Beaumont if you or your colleagues are using ChatGPT on a regular basis, or again, whatever bot you may have embraced. But that's a conversation that should be having it at any local jurisdiction, right?
I'm feeling the conviction. I am not doing that currently, but I will get on it. You have my word. All right. So when I have conversations about things like this subject, I want to see it for myself. Y'all know how it is. I don't want to talk about how cool and practical basin wrenches are. I want to pick one up and play with it. And disclaimer for those who don't know what a basin wrench is, that's not AI. Ed Salerso is with us. Ed is the project lead on ICC's AI Navigator, which I'm excited for y'all to. This is our chance to pick artificial intelligence up and play with it. Am I wrong there?
No, you're absolutely right. I have been picking up and playing with it for over a year now at this point. And that's exactly how AI Navigator started, was with that playing process of saying, what's the most useful thing we can build using these new tools?
Awesome. Tell us about what you've been working on, and thank you for joining us in this conversation. But tell us about what you have going on.
We started this really fairly early in 2023 and did evaluation of AI and large language model AI tools. And I have to say, it was pretty terrifying at first. Powerful tools, you can see the writing talent of the tools, you can see the power of the tools. And yet at the same time, when we just started throwing tools at code content and with very typical questions that were related to building codes, we saw really low accuracy and just a lot of fumbling around and no really good sourcing of those answers. And so that's where it led us to the idea that became AI Navigator, which is one of the projects I spend a lot of time on with the ICC. And AI Navigator is a custom large language model AI tool that is specifically for questions on ICC codes. So it allows you to choose code sets that you want to ask questions about, ask those questions, in plain language, and then get answers that are typically fairly brief and focused answers. There was some sort of special sauce in there that we've done to try to keep ChatGPT a lot briefer and concise in its answers, and then references to that code. So one of the powers of that tool is not just that it's providing an answer, is that we have it ranking and providing resources and links within the digital code content, which I think is where it really makes a much more powerful and practical tool that way.
Yeah. What's the success rate for what y'all
So
have going?
in terms of success rate, the answer is always it depends. But in terms of, we use a test question set that we worked on with our technical services staff, and we consistently now have it over 80% of answers that we rate at our highest level, that we say it is providing a clear answer and the correct references. Now, that can't account for every question that people ask. So we also allow the users to rate it. And the users typically are rating it thumbs up or thumbs down at about a 65% rate thumbs up, which is actually above what our target was. So we had targeted it to get better than 60%. And we would be happy, because we do know that a lot of our audience is very picky. So some of them will ask it questions that honestly probably are a little out of its range. They will sometimes ask it questions that are not necessarily really questions. And that's one of the problems we've tried to deal with is, sometimes the user input really makes it more difficult for it to be successful. And other times you're just plain picky. The audience that consumes our content are people that expect a lot. They're probably expecting more out of an AI tool than a typical person that converses with ChatGPT.
Give me an example of a bad question. If I'm going into this and wanting to ask it a question, what's good, what's bad?
The number one thing I think that makes bad questions is that people try to get too much out of one question. It's really hard. Large language models can be programmed specifically for multi-part questions, but we don't do that. And we sort of advise our users that if you have 3 things to ask it, break it up into 3 things. So an example question I use a lot of times is somebody asking about, hey, I've got 2 buildings on a lot and they're commercial buildings and one's brick and one's wood framed. And they provide all that information and they say, okay, tell me what the fire requirements are between all of this. And what you've done is you've thrown so much information that you're not likely to get the absolute most accurate answers out of that. And then I show people the examples of, now break that into 2 questions that sort of get to your 2 major points. And in the demo I show, a lot of times you can ask 2 different questions to say, okay, what are firewall requirements for 2 buildings on a commercial lot? And you ask that question first. And you say, okay, now tell me what the differences are between brick and wood framed requirements. And you tend to get 2 very good answers at that point. So that's the number one thing I think we see in terms of questions that are just still very difficult.
You hit the nail on the head. It sounds reasonable to me that if you want to help generate the most accurate answer, you would be as detailed as possible. And so you're saying essentially that's the wrong way to go about it. So I would have failed. So thanks for the clarity.
Yeah, right. No, you're right. What you want to do with AI chatbots almost always, and that it really does go with ours in general, is just think about the logical components that you want to know. Because if you can break those logical components down and ask them in a series, it almost always generates a better overall quality of answer.
Right.
And your expectations also need to be realistic on these things. It's with a tool where you're asking clear questions that you can feel pretty confident are within the code and you're using an ICC tool, it's pretty reasonable to expect a decent response, and you'll usually get one. If your questions get into philosophy or things that, you probably have a suspicion aren't in the code, I can tell you that our AI Navigator, we purposefully restrict it to codebook content. So it is very much using as its source materials code resources that are published by the ICC. That is really the point of it.
So detailed might not be the appropriate thing to strive for, but a concise question is probably a better way to put it.
If you sort of read the question you typed and say, wow, that's an awful lot I'm asking, is there a way to break that down? Because it'll probably help you in the end too.
Was it Einstein who said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it? So if you can't ask the question simply, you don't even, Yeah. So that's extremely helpful. What steps are y'all taking though to improve the responses? Is that, I would imagine with AI, the beauty is it can always improve. It can always get better. And so what are some of the practical things you are doing right now?
It's really about sort of, I think, a couple different factors. So there's 3 things I think that we have focused our attention on. The first of which is improving the data source and the structure of that. So it sounds a little crazy to people that don't know, but the most efficient way to feed AI chatbots, and really the only way that they work and perform, is if you turn all of your content into what you would call vector content. You break everything down into patterns of zeros and ones, everything you're feeding it. The pictures you're feeding it, the tables, all the text, everything. And as you're doing that, you do start to see within the content that decisions that were made in structuring the code that never thought about AI actually affect how AI is interpreting what we're putting in there. So, there's a lot of tweaking that is still going on over time for us to look at the data store that we're providing it and making sure it understands and prioritizes that content correctly. Because a really important thing to understand about LLMs is they have no natural inclination to prioritize anything. So when you want to give things priority, if you want to say, as somebody building something and providing it source data, I'm providing you source data, these particular bits of it are really the most important. You have to structure it so that those are the most important. And that can get extremely deep and out of my pay grade in terms of, you can really make that a real tech problem. So that work continues, and our team works on that and gets advice all the time on that, and sort of has come up with a lot of, I think, good ideas as to how we can continue to refine that process and really add more content in. Because one of the things we do want to do is increase the amount of content. Today, if you're using AI Navigator, it is using codebook content from sort of those primary code books, the IBC, the IRC, all of those books as its primary content. But we really want to start to integrate things like the ICC commentaries and our premium answers product. And we have these great answers from our technical services team. They're not yet integrated in, but we're working on doing that right now. So that's some of what the future is. First off, expanding the content while still making sure it's high quality content.
Speaking of the future, what about the design process? I can see AI playing a huge role in that. So where do you see AI plugging into the design phase?
I think that's actually a great application for it. So I think if you are looking in the design process, I think you can have tools being built on the front end so the design applications are basically crafting questions for AI. If I am building, something and I know where I'm building this and I'm designing it and I want to get information on, have I designed the right type of egress corridors? Have I designed all the correct windows into this? Have I done other things? Getting that information out of design applications and then crafting it and sending that information to an AI tool that can say, I can quickly reference things and provide you feedback and sources to look at. And I think the sources is always going to be important when we're talking about codes and building, because I think AI answers, because building codes themselves can on certain topics be layered and have numerous factors to consider, it's really important for AI to present that back to people as well. But I think that's a no-brainer for it to be in the process in that way. I also think AI, even in the process of fairly simple questions, things that are a little less detailed, just like, I am at this stage of this process. What should I be asking about? What should I be concerned about, sort of at a more general level? I think it's really helpful, because I certainly hear from people I talk to, that's where they get stuck sometimes is, I'm using a design application, I'm doing something, but I don't actually know what I don't know at this point. What should I be asking next? And actually, AI could tell you that.
I got to say, this is one of the most encouraging applications I think that has happened in our industry. And I'm still in a lot of sense wet behind the ears, but this is huge. This is a game changer for what we do.
And I think we can improve it and refine it to the point that it just becomes a more and more reliable tool as time goes on too. And that's really where my ambition is with it, is to make sure, that it's always getting better, that we continue to build confidence in it in answering your question.
Ed, I love it. We'll bring you back later, but first, let's learn a little bit about our sponsor for today, 4Leaf.
4Leaf, a proud sponsor of the International Code Council, is a multidiscipline firm providing services throughout the United States. As one of the industry's leading providers of building and fire, life safety, code enforcement, planning, disaster recovery programs, and inspector of record services for both complex commercial structures and CIP programs, their clients value their continuous flexibility, proactive communication, and unfailing dedication that results in projects that are both on time and on budget. Please visit 4leafinc.com for more information, or email them at careers@4leafinc.com. That's 4leafinc.com. If you're looking to join a fast-growing, dynamic organization, look no further than 4Leaf. 4Leaf, building partnerships since 1999.
Hey, Hey, welcome back. Now, I kind of feel like we should talk about the elephant in the room here. So much of what you hear about AI, it's pretty dark, and it really comes down to who is making the decision about AI on the front end. And a big question relevant to our world is, what is the AI equivalent of building codes? I want you to hear from Jason Matiso. Jason is the general manager of the corporate standards group for Microsoft. Jason, can you share a bit about how you're creating meaningful AI standards?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me be part of the show. I really appreciate it. Let's start with this idea of what people are really hoping to see. When we talk about AI, and you just made a comment that it can seem very dark, because everybody really starts with a discussion about the risks, and they really start thinking about, well, how can it go wrong? When we get to this idea of risks, people are looking for, how do we balance the speed at which the technology is moving with the fact that we have laws that are coming into play. You have around the world different legal regimes that are going to be working, but that's like talking about a rabbit moving at high speed and an iceberg that's flowing really, really slowly. And somewhere between them, they're looking for mechanisms of soft laws or of things like standards or codes of conduct or regimes like labeling regimes, different ways that we can think about how do you build an accountability of trust into the world of AI.
Right.
And so that's really what we're trying to get at is what's the difference? Because a standard in and of itself is just a stack of paper. It's a bunch of engineers or individuals who really know a subject sat down, wrote something down, and what's going to get real is when people go and use that and they build it into their systems. They start to say, how do I do that? There's also a difference between technology standards. So you and I might wake up in the morning and pick our mobile phone up and we get into our car and we want the phone to talk to the car. We depend on Bluetooth. That's 80 different standards. It's stacks and stacks of paper that define how radio waves get used in a way to help devices communicate. When we're talking about AI standards, people really aren't thinking yet about technology standards because those things are evolving in a very different way around open source software or around academic papers that are defining how models are trained. But what we're really getting at are standards that are going to be about behaviors. What does it look like to have human oversight of the process? How are we going to deal about bias in data sets? How are we going to address explainability of what these systems are doing? And that's where standards are playing a really important role, but really parsing out the different elements has been an important step for us to begin with. The other aspect that I think people really want to hear about is we start to say, what about the ethics? It's got to be about the ethics of AI. And I have long been resisting this idea that standardization of ethics is the right point to focus on. And the reason for that, we get a standards committee meeting together. Bunch of engineers. There's nobody in the room who knows the difference between a deontological ethic and a Kantian ethic. They're not trained ethicists. But what we can do is describe the engineering practices or the technique to address things like unwanted bias in data. But we're going to expect the legal systems and our societal structures have to then place the element of what is an ethical use of an AI system versus a non-ethical use of that AI system.
So what's next when you think about AI standardization? What do you see next? Maybe both for Microsoft and even bigger.
Yeah, everything my team does is really trying to ask the bigger question. Yeah. My team is sitting on a little over 200 standards committees at any given time in better than 20 countries. And we are really trying to think about how these pieces fit together. And I would say that roughly 40% of my resources have been focused on responsible AI behaviors for the past 5 years. So this is not a new conversation. I guess one of the things I'll do is have you step back a moment and realize that the artificial intelligence standards landscape is a more complicated picture than we all want it to be. There are dozens and dozens of standards bodies in the United States alone that are looking at AI as it applies to their particular area of expertise. But the truth is, the standards landscape, you could argue, is actually a landscape of soft law mechanisms. This might be surprising to some to hear, but there are actually no standards out there today for how to train an AI model. It doesn't exist. Nobody has a standard that says this is how you do it. You all may have heard of OpenAI, and Microsoft has a deep relationship with that company, but there's no standard for how to do what they're doing. There are academic publications that are the state of the art for how data scientists can work with very large scale data sets and learn from them. But the real challenge behind the scenes is that the vast majority of the technical pace of things that are moving are happening through what's called open source software, or collaborative development methodologies. And those are tens of thousands of projects moving at lightning speed every day, where you have unlimited numbers of companies and experts working together on projects, and they are visible to everybody. But that is a very organic process that does create common behaviors and common information, but it may not be quite the same thing as a standard. So we are really trying to take in that whole picture to say, what is it that we are needing as a society for responsible behaviors in AI, and how to do that? And by the way, some of the impacts are positive. Sometimes you want to make sure that you're preserving the positive element of a AI system, and you can articulate that and then test for that. And then the last thing, and this is where I think governments are going to help the most, is around measurement. Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Do I have the language to be able to do that? How do I measure the reliability or the predictability of that model, as opposed to, can I explain how it's working? And so these are very fine shavings on the concepts, but if you can't have that level of specificity, then we can't start to declare that we'll trust those systems.
Last question. How do you expect AI to play a role in the building safety industry moving forward? Again, I know this isn't your industry, building safety, but just from your side of the fence, how do you expect the two worlds to collide?
Thank you for saying that, Beau. To be clear, I really don't know the particulars of your industry, but what I do know is that all industries right now are looking at how you're going to consume the capabilities, the augmentations of AI, and integrate it into those things that you already do. So let's take something like an accounting system. We are a very long way away from being able to say, like a Star Trek conversation, computer, balance my books, run my month end, right? And it'll just go and do that. But companies like SAP or Oracle, they are going to imbue their systems with dozens, if not hundreds, of different AI models. Some of them might be very specific, that they really are trained on data sets that are particular around an element. And then they're going to be able to augment the tools that are available to accountants and to financial analysts and planners and supply chain managers to be able to rapidly increase the productivity within that domain. So within building safety, you can think about things like the capability of AI systems to validate what they're looking at. And you have a drone that's able to move around a structure and take 10 million pictures of that same structure, and then know whether or not cracks are dangerous or not, or know whether or not there are things that they're able to look at. But you're going to see, I am sure, a million different ways that AI will augment the tools that are available to people in your industry. And then the real importance is going to come behind it with the standards to say, how do I certify that the visual versus text versus audio AI enablements that might enhance the applications and tools that are available to us? I need to make sure that I trust those models and that they're able to do what they say they're going to do, and I can build that into the work that I have. So there won't be one AI master system that they turn to. It's really about, the next decade is going to be about tools enabled by hundreds of models, and integrating those. Software developers will just make calls where they'll say, validate this image. Well, they really don't know what model they're using behind it, but it is an AI empowered system that's going to help them be able to get that done.
Well, Jason, thank you again for your time, and anything you want to circle back to, or?
What I would say is balance the optimism with realism, and recognize that if I hand you a shovel, that shovel is awesome at digging a hole. But I can also take that shovel and whack you upside the head with it and turn it into something other than a tool, and it turns into a weapon. And for AI systems right now, the biggest challenge for us is not about weaponization, but either misuse or unintended consequence. And that's the balance. We have an amazing set of new tools that are open to us, that open incredible opportunity, and we have to balance the other side of it.
Man, that's a great point. Jason, thanks for time on this subject. You know, after talking with Jason about the use of AI in our world, I want to bring back Ed Salerso. Ed, what are the obstacles you see in adopting AI in the building safety industry?
I think one of the primary adoption issues is that AI does operate to a different accuracy standard than people are used to. You know, even when I'm pretty confident that I've trained this to be 80+% reliable, there's definitely an audience that says, wow, that's still outside of the tolerance I'm comfortable with. You know, I'm looking for 99% or 100%.
Right.
And that's why we've been very cognizant in building the tool that we build, that it's going to provide you an answer but it's always going to provide you where it got the context of that answer from. And when I show people how to use this tool, I never say, okay, read its 2 sentences and walk away. I always show them, hey, open up exactly what it's citing and make sure you're comfortable that what it's citing is the correct reference to the question you asked. I think the other thing that's really crucial to make sure it's well adopted is to get people into that mindset of how to iterate as they work through, working with an AI tool. So I think more needs to be done to make sure people that are using these sort of are just using good practices in asking questions and working with these tools in a way that is the most likely to be productive. And I think very little effort that I've seen has gone on that track. I mean, almost 100% of the media coverage of these tools is step up and ask it anything. And that's really the wrong way to talk about using a tool. Like there's no other tool. We don't hand people hammers and say, do whatever you want with this hammer. It'll work.
Yeah, that's right.
Go chop your onions with it. We don't say that. And AI tools are not different than hammers in that way. There are best ways to work with them.
I want to do this.
Go ahead.
Live with you. Okay, so I pulled up AI Navigator on ICC's. I got my premium account pulled up. Shameless plug. Okay, enter my question. It says your question will be answered using the 2021 iCodes. Okay.
Correct. And you can change that if you'd like to. As you'll see, there's navigation on the top left. So if you wanted to say, well, I want to answer with California's codes instead and other things like that, that will change what it uses as its source material.
How about this? Can I have a 5,500 square feet restaurant with wood frame construction? How's that?
Okay, let's go for that. It's not one I've asked it before, but I'm always unafraid.
I got to spell restaurant first.
It probably doesn't care. That is one of the things that they are very good at your misspelling. You can misspell an awful lot of words, and it probably will know what you mean.
Why is it that autocorrect never works when I want it to work? All right, can I have a 5,500 square foot restaurant with wood frame construction? Here we go.
Yep.
Considering all the possibilities for your situation.
Yep. And so typically what you're going to see is anywhere from about 10 to 20 seconds to return an answer, because it does have to return like we enforce that it must return citations with it, and it must rank those citations. So that actually takes a little bit of extra time in what it's doing.
Okay, so it levels with me. It says, I'm not certain about the best answer, but you might look here.
Yeah, and so it is programmed to do that. So if you've asked a question that it has a confidence level on its own, and about, again, 20% is probably a good number to use. I think it's right around 21 or 22. It specifically says, if you have a low confidence answer, tell the user that this is a low confidence answer. I'm not certain. Here are the sections that you want to reference.
That's fun. I want to play with this more.
Definitely. I mean, what I tell people generally is ask it the questions you want to ask it and, see how it performs and go ahead and rate it. It will not be 100% successful. So if it's not, you can give it that thumbs down. I'm going to know in the end that you gave it that thumbs down, and that's going to mean something to me on the other end.
And that feedback is helpful because we can address that.
Yeah.
I'm told that at last year's annual conference, they had Stump the Bot. And so we've talked a lot about response accuracy. Are building codes tricky for AI?
When we say tricky about building codes, what we really mean is that while building codes are highly structured content, and that's great, and they are a source of truth, and that's great, they also provide a lot of options, and they repeat a lot of terminology. Some words, such as egress, is a classic one. Egress is used constantly throughout the building code, but it's in there thousands and thousands of times. That means that you have to be careful in terms of, how an AI tool is going to be trained to bring in that content. And some of the structures that are very common in code content, like lists of exceptions, to say, hey, this is the code, but there are 6 exceptions or qualifications or other things that apply to that. Those work against, to some degree, how large language models work the best, and which means we really have to train it very specifically. Plugging in off-the-shelf ChatGPT short content, we've looked at that very carefully and said we have to do more than that to achieve the type of accuracy, to achieve the type of quality of response that we're really looking for. Everybody that works on AI Navigator, I think, will tell you that this has been a very challenging project, probably more than any of us anticipated. But at the same time, huge fun factor as a project of you constantly are thinking, and some of those thoughts really take you in directions you didn't anticipate being in at the beginning. And that's always fun for me.
Well, Ed, this has been fun for me. I'm grateful for you, brother. This is an amazing tool, and I think everyone in our industry can really get a lot out of it, with more to come. But as exciting as this is, we all know how hard it can be to adopt new technology. So I want to bring back Joan O'Neill. Joan, how are y'all dealing with that resistance to change and fostering a culture of innovation?
I'm a big believer in modeling the way, right? We need to, if we're not modeling the way for others, then how can we expect others to embrace change? So that's a big part of, again, my mission and the ICC's mission. It's not just let's move to digital, but why, and now AI, and what are the benefits? So that's our job, to explain and to show our constituents that there's a benefit to doing this, and it will result in, and again, more efficiencies in your particular organization. It will accelerate turnaround times and so forth. And so I think of AI as just the latest version of a new technology, but it's probably the most powerful that we've seen in a long time.
Love that. All right. One more question for you. You probably know it's coming. Tradition of the podcast. I got to ask, what is your favorite building and why?
I do. The last podcast I did, my favorite building was Willis Tower in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, but now I've been in New York for many years, and I will say the World Trade Center. You know, after 9/11, we built what was called the Freedom Tower for many years, and now it's officially backed as the World Trade Center Tower. And it's in Lower Manhattan in Battery Park. And to me, it is a symbol of freedom, what we represent, but it is a glorious building. It is built, with all the safety protocols that state-of-the-art provide. And for anyone who is familiar with New York, after 9/11, many people said New York will never come back. Battery Park is gone as an area to live. It's now probably the biggest thriving area in New York City, 20-some years later.
Cool.
And not only that building is an icon in the city, but it's surrounded by beautiful buildings and parks and so forth. So I have to say that's my favorite. And when I do my bike rides around the city, I always make a stop. It's a proud building for our city and for the world.
I love it. That's a great answer, just from the reason behind the answer. And I'm curious if anybody will trump that answer. That's pretty good. That's good stuff.
Thank you.
Joan, thanks for your time today again.
Absolutely. And appreciate, Beau, your knowledge in the space makes it even a really great two-way conversation. So thank you. Appreciate the questions and look forward to hearing from our listeners in terms of what they're learning and what they like to see from us going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joan. And thanks to the Code Council's Ed Salerso and Microsoft's Jason Matiso for bringing us up to speed on this amazing new tool. I know I'm going to be using it a lot. ICC is leading the way with this, and they're the only standards development organizations that's doing it right now. So we're lucky to have it at our fingertips. When you think about how much has changed just in the last few years, to have every code book you could possibly need accessible on your phone, and now to layer AI on top of that in order to further equip our code officials, these are huge steps in the right direction for the building safety industry. So stay updated on this, not only in connection with our ICC teammates, but also on your own. Practice asking AI Navigator questions for specific topics that are relevant to you, and give feedback on what you learn. In so many ways, we're all learning this together. AI Navigator is included with the Digital Codes Premium subscription, so if you've got one, it's all yours. And if you don't, you can sign up for a 14-day free trial at codes.iccsafe.org. Quick shout out and special thanks to Landmark Media for editing this season of the ICC Pulse Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, I think you're absolutely going to appreciate our next one, where we hear tales from the testing facility. With so many new materials being rolled out, there's a lot going on behind the scenes to make our jobs as code officials so much easier. But I'll leave you with this. In these knowledge-driven conversations that we get to have every day, people don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. So let's be quick to listen, slow to speak, and we'll meet back here next time on the ICC Pulse Podcast.